The lobby of the Grand Hôtel de l'Océan in Dakar was less a waiting area and more a carefully orchestrated performance of luxury and exclusivity. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, stood slightly apart from the main currents of this luxurious flow. He wasn't at the reception desk, wasn't seated in one of the prominent armchairs. He stood near a large, leafy, potted palm, a quiet observer in a space designed for being seen. He was in Dakar for a brief, unscheduled stopover, a necessary, almost abrupt pivot in a regional schedule that was constantly demanding and unpredictable. His presence here, in this bastion of international luxury, was deliberately low profile. His security detail, a small, highly professional team, was present but effectively invisible, melted into the background of the lobby. A man engrossed in a newspaper in a distant armchair. His eyes, however, missing nothing. Another seemingly lost. In his phone near the main entrance, his posture relaxed, yet subtly alert. Traoré himself had made a conscious choice to dress down, to shed the formal attire of state that often drew unwanted attention. He wore a simple, dark, unbranded jacket over a plain, comfortable dark shirt, trousers that were practical for travel rather than high fashion. He carried no briefcase, wore no flashy watch, no obvious symbols of power or wealth, just the quiet intensity that seemed to emanate from him, a stillness that was often mistaken by those who didn't know him for meekness, hesitation, or simply a lack of significance. The lobby was undeniably busy, a constant ebb and flow of international travelers, sharp-suited business executives, and wealthy tourists adorned with expensive jewelry. Among them, a particularly loud and demanding presence was making itself known near the highly polished reception desk, shattering the lobby's carefully cultivated tranquility. A man, portly and red-faced, his neck bulging slightly over the collar of a suit that looked expensive but strained at the seams, was engaged in a heated, one-sided argument with a young woman behind the counter. His voice, thick with indignant self-importance, cut through the lobby's refined ambiance like a rusty saw. "This is absolutely unacceptable. Outrageous," he boomed, slapping his open palm onto the counter with a sound that echoed slightly in the hushed space and made several nearby guests flinch, their polite smiles freezing. "I booked this suite 3 months ago. 3 months in advance. Confirmed it twice. And you're telling me now that it's not ready? Do you have any idea who I am? The kind of business I conduct? The kind of money I spend in establishments like this?" The young woman at the desk, her name tag reading Aminata Guest Services, looked visibly flustered, her eyes wide with stress, her hands trembling slightly as they hovered over the keyboard. She was clearly new to this level of aggressive entitlement, perhaps a trainee or recently hired, overwhelmed by the guest's aggression and the public spectacle he was creating. "Sir, I am truly, truly sorry," she murmured, her voice barely audible above his bluster. There was a slight, unexpected issue with the previous occupant's departure, a delay in the final cleaning and inspection. "We are working on preparing it now, I promise. It will only be a short delay, perhaps 30 minutes at the most." "30 minutes? A short delay?" the man roared, his face growing even redder, almost purple with indignation. He leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its volume or menace. "My time is worth more than your entire month's salary, girl. Probably your whole year's. I have urgent international calls to make, multi-million-dollar deals to close. I don't have 30 minutes to stand around in your glorified waiting room like some kind of tourist." He gestured wildly around the lobby with a dismissive sweep of his arm, his eyes darting over the other guests with open disdain, as if their mere presence, their quiet patience, was an added insult to his own inconvenience. His gaze flickered over Traoré, standing quietly by the palm tree, a figure of stillness amidst the man's agitation, and lingered for a moment, a look of dismissive impatience, of utter lack of recognition on his face. Traoré watched the scene unfold with a calm, steady gaze. He had encountered this type of individual many times before, in different countries and different contexts. Individuals who genuinely believed that their wealth, their perceived status, gave them an inherent right to treat others with contempt, to demand immediate subservience, to disregard the dignity of anyone they deemed beneath them. He felt a familiar weariness, a deep-seated fatigue at the persistence of such arrogance, but also a quiet, stealing resolve. These public displays of entitlement weren't just isolated personal incidents. They were potent, ugly symptoms of a larger global imbalance, a mindset of privilege and disregard that he was dedicated to challenging, to dismantling, piece by painstaking piece. in his own nation and on the international stage. The demanding guest, still fuming, his chest puffing out with self-importance, turned slightly, his eyes landing on Traore again. Perhaps he saw the quiet stillness, the simple clothing, the lack of obvious wealth markers. No gleaming watch, no designer briefcase, and mistook it for meekness, hesitation, or simply insignificance. He needed an outlet for the overflowing reservoir of his frustration, someone to target other than the flustered, apologetic Aminata, who was clearly wilting under his verbal assault. He needed to reassert his dominance, to show everyone watching that he was a man of importance and that others were not. "Look at him," the man scoffed, his voice deliberately loud, designed to draw the attention of everyone nearby. He pointed a stubby, accusatory finger vaguely in Traore's direction, his gesture encompassing the quiet figure by the palm tree, standing there like he has all the time in the world. No sense of urgency, probably waiting for a bus, or maybe just admiring the architecture because he's never seen anything like it. Doesn't understand that in places like this, he emphasized the words places like this with heavy irony, time is money. Every second is valuable. Aminata, the guest services trainee, glanced nervously towards Traore, then back at the irate, pointing guest, her face a mask of fear and confusion. She didn't recognize Traore. His face wasn't one she'd been trained to spot among the VIPs. Not in those clothes, not with that quiet demeanor. To her, he was just another quiet passenger caught in the crossfire of this guest's rage, someone she felt a pang of sympathy for, but was powerless to help. Traore remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable, a mask of calm composure. He didn't flinch under the man's accusing gaze or his openly mocking words. He didn't look away. His silence, his lack of immediate reaction, seemed only to fuel the man's rage and arrogance further. He mistook Traore's stillness for weakness, his quietness for insignificance. "Yeah, you," the man barked directly at Traore now, raising his voice even higher, his tone thick with open contempt and challenge. He took a step towards Traore, puffing out his chest, trying to physically intimidate, to dominate the space between them. "What are you looking at? Something funny? Never seen a real businessman before? Someone who actually matters?" He sneered, his lip curling. "Maybe you should just go wait outside if you're just loitering, taking up space. This lobby, this lounge, this hotel, this is for guests, paying guests. Guests who understand the value of service and efficiency." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a low, condescending growl, though still loud enough for the growing crowd of onlookers to hear every humiliating word. Unless you're one of those aid types, or maybe a local looking for a handout, always hanging around places they don't belong, looking for charity." He let out a short, sharp, harsh laugh, a sound devoid of any humor, purely designed to demean. "Stick to the free coffee in the general waiting area, pal. Or maybe the bus station cafe. This is out of your league. Way out of your league." He punctuated this final insult by waving his hand dismissively directly in Traore's face, a gesture of utter contempt, as if swatting away an annoying insect. "Now, if you'll excuse me," he said, turning back towards the reception desk with an air of finality, expecting Traore to shrink away, defeated, humiliated, to disappear back into the anonymity he had tried to maintain. "My suite is waiting. A suite you couldn't afford in a lifetime. Try not to bump into anyone important on your way out." The casual cruelty of the insult, the blatant assumption based purely on appearance and quiet demeanor, the public humiliation, it cut through the lobby's calm like a physical force. Other guests were now openly watching, their earlier polite disinterest replaced by discomfort, fascination, and a morbid curiosity. The scene had escalated rapidly, becoming a full-blown public spectacle in the heart of a prestigious hotel lobby. Aminata, the trainee, looked horrified, her face pale, unsure whether to intervene, call security, or just disappear under the counter. The lobby felt tense, the air thick with the man's aggression and the weight of the public humiliation. But Traore didn't move. He didn't shrink away. He stood his ground, his back straight, his gaze fixed on the man's back with an intensity that few could withstand. His security detail, previously almost invisible, had subtly shifted their positions, their movements, economical and precise. Their eyes were narrowed, their hands near their jackets, their relaxed postures replaced by a coiled readiness. They were waiting for a signal, any signal from their principal. The situation was escalating rapidly, becoming a full-blown public incident in the heart of a prestigious hotel. A direct confrontation fueled by arrogance and mistaken identity. Just as the demanding guest, oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere behind him, was about to resume his tirade against the flustered Aminata, a new powerful presence entered the scene. Moving with swift, purposeful strides from the direction of the executive offices came three individuals who radiated an undeniable aura of authority and control. The first was a woman in an impeccably tailored dark suit, her face serious, her eyes scanning the lobby with a sharp, professional gaze, taking in the scene at the reception desk. Beside her was a man, also formally dressed, holding a tablet and speaking quietly into a hidden earpiece. Behind them walked the hotel's head of security, a large, imposing figure whose mere presence commanded immediate attention and respect. His uniform crisp, his expression alert. These were not entry-level staff. These were the people who ran the Grand Hôtel de l'Océan, the individuals responsible for its smooth operation and the comfort and security of its most important guests. The woman in the lead, the hotel manager, her name tag reading Madame Dubois, a name known and respected within the hotel's hierarchy, scanned the lobby quickly, her gaze drawn immediately to the commotion near the reception desk. The red-faced, demanding guest, the distressed trainee, the quiet man standing nearby, and the growing cluster of onlookers. Her expression, initially one of professional concern at the disturbance, quickly shifted to one of sharp focus, then to something else entirely, something akin to disbelief mixed with alarm, as her eyes landed on Traore. Madame Dubois stopped dead in her tracks, her swift momentum halting abruptly. Her serious professional expression transformed instantly, dramatically, into one of profound, almost startled recognition, followed immediately by a look of intense respect, deep concern, and perhaps a dawning horror as she took in the full scene unfolding before her. The demanding guest towering over him, the obvious tension, the public nature of the confrontation. She didn't hesitate for a second. She moved directly and swiftly towards Traore, her pace quickening, her focus absolute, leaving the demanding guest, who was still facing the reception desk, momentarily forgotten in her urgency. The man with the tablet, clearly her executive assistant or head of protocol, and the imposing head of security followed closely, their eyes also fixed on Traore, their expressions mirroring hers, recognition, respect, and concern. The demanding guest, sensing the sudden dramatic shift in attention away from himself, turned back, his face a picture of annoyance and confusion. "What is this now?" he muttered loudly, his voice still holding a trace of his earlier irritation, expecting the manager was finally coming to personally handle his sweet issue, perhaps offer profuse apologies and lavish compensation. Madame Dubois reached Traore. She didn't extend a hand for a handshake, didn't offer a casual greeting appropriate for a standard hotel guest. Instead, she performed a deep, formal bow, her head dipping low, her back straight, a gesture of profound, institutional deference, a mark of respect so deep and formal that it was unmistakable to anyone who understood protocol, power, and the identity of individuals who received such treatment. "Mr. President," Madame Dubois said, her voice clear, formal, and carrying effortlessly through the sudden, absolute stunned silence that had fallen over the entire lobby. The word resonated in the hushed space, a thunderclap of reality, a seismic shockwave that shattered the carefully constructed reality of the demanding guest and everyone who had been watching the spectacle. "Our sincerest and deepest apologies for any delay or inconvenience you have experienced, and particularly for any discomfort caused by this unfortunate incident. We were not properly informed of your presence in the lobby, and for that, we are truly sorry. Your suite is prepared, and we are ready to escort you immediately and discreetly." The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken weight, echoing in the sudden, profound silence. "President." The demanding guest, Marcus, froze completely, his mouth falling open in a silent gasp, his red face draining of color with astonishing speed, turning a ghastly pasty white. His eyes darted frantically from Madame Dubois, still slightly bowed, to Traore, who stood calmly, holding his book, his expression unreadable. The man's earlier arrogance, his booming voice, his contemptuous gestures, all of it evaporated in an instant, replaced by a look of utter, gut-wrenching shock, disbelief, and dawning, sickening horror. The expensive suit suddenly felt like a costume, the diamond watch a cheap trinket. "President?" he stammered, the word barely a whisper, a choked sound of disbelief. His mind raced, trying to process the impossible. The quiet man in the simple clothes? The one he had just publicly mocked, called an aide type, told to wait outside with the loiterers? Aminata, the guest services trainee, who had been standing frozen behind the counter, her eyes wide with fear and confusion, gasped audibly, a sharp, sudden intake of breath. Her hand flew to her mouth, covering it in shock. Her eyes darted from the bowing manager to Traore. And in that moment, recognition slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. The face she had seen countless times on television news reports, the leader she had seen in newspapers, the man she had dismissed as just another passenger, the man this awful guest had just publicly cruelly mocked as someone who didn't belong. It was him, President Ibrahim Traoré. A look of profound horror, mortification, and a terrible understanding of the gravity of her own oversight flooded her features. Omar, the other young staff member, stood frozen, a rag still clutched in his hand, his mouth agape, his eyes fixed on Traoré with a mixture of shock, awe, and dawning, horrified understanding. Other guests who had been watching the spectacle now exchanged wide-eyed glances, whispers erupting like startled birds. Traoré met Madame Dubois' eyes, offering a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. "Thank you, Madame Dubois," he said again, his voice calm, quiet, utterly devoid of any hint of triumph, accusation, or gloating. He didn't spare a glance for the demanding guest, Marcus, who stood rooted to the spot, his face a mask of horror and dawning, sickening realization, the center of a scandal he had entirely created. Traoré simply turned and began to walk, escorted by Madame Dubois, the man with the tablet, and the imposing head of security, who moved with swift professional purpose, creating a clear path that now felt less like a walkway through a lobby and more like a path of absolute silent, reverent deference through the stunned onlookers. His own security detail, previously unseen, now moved with decisive efficiency, emerging from their dispersed positions to form a tight, protective formation around him as they navigated swiftly towards a private elevator, likely leading directly to his prepared suite, far from the public eye and the scandal unfolding behind him. As Traoré was escorted away, his quiet, dignified presence leaving a vacuum of power and presence in his wake, the absolute silence in the lobby began to fracture. Whispers erupted, spreading like wildfire, fueled by astonishment, disbelief, and a growing sense of shared, horrified realization. Did she actually say Mr. President? Which president? I didn't know a head of state was staying here. That's him, Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso. The one that man was just, oh my God, he was mocking the president. He called him aide type and told him to wait outside in front of everyone. He was standing right there the whole time. And that idiot? The demanding guest, Marcus, the man who had just moments ago been the loud, arrogant center of attention, the one demanding respect and asserting his superiority, now stood frozen, his face a ghastly white, the red completely, gone, replaced by a cold, clammy pallor. His name, his business, his wealth, none of it mattered anymore in this moment. He was simply the man who had publicly, arrogantly insulted a head of state. His earlier arrogance, his booming voice, his contemptuous gestures, all of it evaporated, replaced by the crushing weight of his monumental gaffe, the sheer, horrifying scale of his misjudgment. He looked around the lobby, seeing not just shocked faces, but faces that now held a mixture of pity, disdain, and open, unconcealed amusement at his expense. The staff, moments ago flustered and intimidated by his demands, now looked at him with a kind of grim satisfaction, perhaps even a flicker of triumphant vindication. Aminata, the trainee, was openly staring, her earlier fear completely replaced by a quiet, horrified astonishment and a dawning understanding of the bullet she had inadvertently dodged. He had demanded respect, commanded attention, and asserted his perceived superiority in the most public way possible. And in doing so, he had engineered his own spectacular public humiliation on a scale he could never have imagined. The suite, the delay, the service, the cost of his stay, none of it mattered anymore. All that mattered was the searing, indelible memory of his own appalling behavior and the image of the quiet man in the simple clothes, the man he had dismissed as insignificant, being escorted away with the unquestionable formal deference due to a president, leaving him alone in the suddenly vast, silent lobby, with the bitter, burning taste of his own entitled ignorance.